QSO Today, episode 475, Savetz K6KJN. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Only you can keep the QSO Today podcast coming to you every weekend since 2014. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of QSOtoday.com webpage. I want to thank the following amateurs who became listener sponsors this week. Marty Booring, KB4MG, Larry Classy, W4LEC. The following hams made donations. Dom Westacott, VE6HQ, $60. Gary Ferris, KE7WMQ, $35. We received additional anonymous donations and want to thank you for them. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. I am attempting to blog more. As I said in my last blog post, I am writing very huge essays that I don't post. They may be too preachy. Just give me a stump and I'll stand on it. However, my family and friends can grow weary of my pontifications or agree because we often sit in the same silos. Perhaps my perspective is different because I literally sit in a war zone. By the way, it was a war zone when I moved here 23 years ago. And I'm 5,600 miles from the east coast of the USA. The world does look different from the outside. Stay tuned to my blog post as I can't resist the stump. It's in my blood. I want to thank all of you who either volunteered to be interviewed, allowing me to make my new episodes of QSO Today, and those who have made guest suggestions. The funny thing is that most of the people that I invite to QSO Today tell me that they don't have a story and are not very interesting. Well, this makes me chuckle as I know better, and so do you. Savetz K6KJN followed his father, Steve, into amateur radio when he entered college and journalism school at the beginning of the Atari computer age. Tech journalism is K's profession, leading him to be the technical historian specializing in amateur radio and communications at the Internet Archive. We dig deep into K's interest in amateur radio, technology and communications history, and the Atari 8-bit computers in this QSO Today. K6KJN, this is Eric 4Z1UG. Are you there, K?
I am here. Hello, this is K6KJN.
Kay, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
My dad was a ham. He was also a K6KJN. I remember when I was little, he had in his car what I called his talking radio. And it was, I don't know, maybe a 10-meter radio or something. And he'd drive around and we'd drive around the valley, and I could hear these strange voices, talking, and I thought that was fascinating. He was a high school teacher, and he taught an electronics class. One day, also when I was little, I got to hang out there for some reason. I went to work with him, and I hung out in the electronics lab, and there was a ham radio there, some sort of HF rig, and I got to just tune the dial and just listen to the strange sounds coming from the ether. And I think that's what originally got me interested.
So did he have a rig at home or just in the car?
Just in the car and at work.
And when you say the valley, are you referring to the San Fernando Valley or are you referring to the other valley?
The San Fernando Valley.
The San Fernando Valley. What was your hometown then in the San Fernando Valley?
I grew up in Agoura Hills, went to Calabasas High, the SoCal area.
So when I lived in the valley, there was no Agoura Hills yet.
When I moved to Agoura Hills, it was called Agoura.
Exactly, on the 101 freeway.
Mm-hmm. You said the 101. I can tell you're a real Southern California boy.
I grew up in Southern California, and I went to college at UC Santa Barbara. So the 101 was the transit road between Santa Barbara and Orange County. So I spent a lot of hours. Man Communications was in Ogura, which maybe you don't remember.
I don't know it.
So Man Communications was a place, if you wanted to buy old Motorola T-Powers, surplus radios, tube-type mostly surplus radios, Man Communications was the place to get that stuff, and that was also in Ogura.
Wow.
Okay, so you grew up in the Valley, went to school in Agoura Hills, and your father was an electronics teacher. Where? Do you remember what high school he went to?
I'm sorry, I don't remember right now. It wasn't near Agoura. He was in a more LA-ish, and I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of the...
You developed an early interest in amateur radio by listening to that HF radio. Did you have more opportunities? Did you end up getting an HF radio or an SWL radio to listen to before you got your license?
I had access to a shortwave radio and really enjoyed listening to that. I had no idea what I was hearing. Sometimes it was scary. I mean, there was like weird little bleeps and blips and who knows what, but to my little, 10-year-old brain or whatever, I'm just like, it was weird. It was weird and like ethereal and interesting, but scary, like watching a horror movie or something. It's just, I don't know. Is that strange? But I was intrigued by it, but didn't actually get my ham license until I went off to college. My first year in college, finished high school and went off to college, and that 1989, and that is when I decided to get my license.
When you went to college, where did you go and what did you study?
Went to Humboldt State University in Arcata, California. I studied journalism.
Really? Oh, that's very interesting. And why did you choose journalism and not, say, physics or electronics or something like that?
Well, I was not not a technical. We didn't call it then, but I was not a STEM person. I wasn't good with math. I was great with computers, but not good with math. And at the time, everyone was just like, "You're so good with computers. Why aren't you good with math?" I'm like, it seems very different to me. But in high school, I had been on actually starting in middle school, I had been on the school newspaper and discovered I was good at it. I was good at writing. I was good at finding a story and explaining it in a way that was easily digestible. So I did that in middle school. I continued it in high school, and it just made sense for me to I thought I wanted to be maybe a newspaper reporter or something like that. So
you graduated from Humboldt State in journalism, and did you go to work for a newspaper?
I didn't. By then, I had decided that I didn't want to write for a newspaper. I wanted to write, but I didn't want to be like a newspaper beat journalist kind of thing. So I started freelancing. I knew about computers. I was self-taught in computers and the internet at that point, and I started freelancing for computer magazines, and I was going to do that temporarily until I found a real job. I never did find a real job. I freelanced for 13 or 14 years and wrote for any computer magazine that you saw on the shelf.
Right. So PC Magazine, Wired.
Yeah, I wrote one time for Wired. I wrote for Byte one time. I wrote for the Washington Post. I wrote for a bunch of Mac magazines and Computer Shopper, many, many different magazines.
As I recall, that was the golden age of computer magazines. If you're talking 1989, and probably by the time you graduated, they kind of figured out what might be the standard for PCs.
Yeah.
Because I think PCs were going through an evolution in terms of what they might look like and who's going to end up with the operating system. We all know how that ended. But I remember CPM machines and K-Pro and Compaq. California was the center, it seemed like, of all of this activity.
Yes, to me, I mean, I graduated in college and started writing for computer magazines in 1992. To me, I guess they say like the golden age of comic books is like whenever you were in middle school, in eighth grade or whatever, right? And to me, the golden age of computer magazines was when I was in middle school and high school. Because yes, there was so much diversity, so many in computer systems. Yeah, you had the CPM and you had the Apple II and you had the K-Pros and the Ataris, and it wasn't just this homogenous Windows and Mac, sort of deal. It just seemed super interesting and so many things to learn, and you could have a computer and you could totally know how to do it, and your best buddy could have a different computer and it could work completely differently.
Well, it was kind of like, at least as I remember it, because I remember seeing with my friend Wayne Burdick, N6KR, we were in high school and there was a professor at San Diego State. I think he was a computer scientist who had the first Radio Shack computer. He was using a cassette tape recorder for the data, to load it. It was so amazing. But I think what I remember from that whole period is people were trying to define what a personal computer was. Or was it even a personal computer, or was it for a small business computer? It was like, what are these things? What can we do with them? And what does the interface look like between us and the machine? And so everybody was making their stab, if you recall. Xerox had early on, probably in 1982, 83, 84, something that looked like Windows.
Right. They had the Star and then the Alto, Xerox Alto. And yeah, they were the first GUI machine. Yeah. And they were amazing.
It was a very interesting time. And I knew hams that were going into the computer business thinking that they were going to make computer hardware, or they were designing it before the Chinese all of a sudden came in. So power supplies weren't standardized yet. Cases looked different.
Mm-hmm.
You have an Atari behind you.
I do. Behind me is my dad became mine, but my dad's Atari 800, his original machine. And I love it.
I remember Timex.
Timex, yeah. Everyone, yeah, Timex Sinclair.
Everybody was making computers to kind of put their foot in the game somehow.
I just went to Portland Retro Gaming Expo last weekend, and it's just this big show, con of people who like old video games, and they had the first Radio Shack computer that you mentioned, the TRS-80 Model 1, and it was someone was selling it. It was in beautiful condition. It had the expansion module and the original monitor, and it was just refurbished and recapped, and it looked beautiful. I didn't want to own it, but I did stand there for 5 or 10 minutes just looking at it, just like admiring this piece of
thinking what to do with it. What does your museum, your personal museum, what do you have?
My main thing is Atari 8-bit computers. That was my first love, and I don't say that like in a metaphorical way. The Atari 800 was like my first love. It was like the first thing I just like cottoned onto. Like this is amazing, and I want to be with this machine all the time. So I have all the various Atari 8-bit machines that they came out with, and a very large book collection of pretty much every book about that computer that came out in the United States. Various weird gadgets and peripherals that came out for it over the years, for hooking up hard drives, or there's one that's called a Mind Link, where it literally has like a skull cap you wear on your head, and you could like control the computer with your brain. It was ridiculous. So that's my personal museum is all Atari 8-bit stuff.
And that's very amazing. And the Atari stuff, as I recall, like everything else, there weren't really VGA monitors yet in those days. So they had channel 3 outputs.
No, you're expected to hook it up to your television set.
So then the resolution also was television grade, which was 535 lines of raster.
Right.
It was okay, but it wasn't high def.
Right. We didn't know what we didn't have. It was great. It was perfect.
This is true.
All I knew is that the graphics were way better than the Apple II, and arguably better than the Commodore 64. And so that's what mattered to us at the time.
What happened to Atari in the long run? I mean, Atari, I think, has the reputation of being not a cute computer company, but a gaming company, right?
Right. Atari has gone through some interesting transitions. They started off owned by a guy, the founder, and then it was sold to Warner Communications, the movie company, and then it got sold to a guy named Jack Tramiel, and then after that, has been passed off from like holding company to holding company for the last 30 or 40 years. It was owned by a disk drive manufacturer for a while, and then it was owned by like Infogrames, which this French video game company, and it's just been passed around. Today, it's in a really interesting place, and I don't know what to think about it. But right now, Atari is, a few years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, they were in a really bad place. They were into just every scam they were into NFTs and Atari coin and just like
blockchain
stuff. And I just it just felt dirty and like it was so far away from what Atari used to be. And I think they've pivoted now, and they are doing video games. They're buying a lot of other video game related properties. They bought a website last year called Moby Games, which is a big database. They just bought Digital Eclipse, which is a video game producing company. They just bought Atari Age, which is a forum about computing, computer history, video game history that's been around for like 25 years. So they're on this buying spree. They're either going to create an amazing company about old games, or they're just going to ruin all of these great sites that companies that have been around for a while. And I don't know which direction it's going to go in, but it's fascinating to watch. Kind
of like the Google acquisition of your favorite product only to close it down a year later.
Right. I'm still mad about Google Reader. I'm still salty about that every day. They didn't acquire it. They created it, but the RSS reader.
You become dependent on technology. I've had the same problem. For example, you're a podcaster as well. Mm-hmm. So right now I'm typing show notes in Google Suite. And one of the nice things is if you can do a Control K, then it opens up the search, and all of a sudden you get all the search terms. So if you want to put links on keywords, it used to be you got a very nice big selection. They tweaked it last year or 2 years ago, so you get 2 choices. So it makes the work a little bit harder because now I have to open up a browser window. They do things like that.
You used to be, back in the day, you installed software, it was on your computer, and it was the same until you installed the next version. You installed Microsoft Word version 5 on your Mac, it was going to be rock solid stable because it would just not change. And now, right, everything's in the cloud. Features move around, they added, deleted, and it's never quite the same software twice. And you're always on this learning curve. It's like never a flat road of like, I know how to use the software. It's always just a little bit up because you can log in tomorrow and it's a little bit different than it was today.
I'm an Office 365 administrator. So if you're in the back end of Office 365, you'll wake up the next day and you'll find that the back end interface has changed. They've changed the name of Azure to something else. It's an amazing marketing name, but the interfaces look different. If you're a back-end administrator for Office 365, you're continually having to relearn the system because they've changed everything. And I think part of that is that as these companies get so large, they've got one team in Seattle that's working on one product in that suite, and they got somebody in Bangalore that's working on the other product in the suite, and they're not talking to each other. They're connected somehow, but even the interfaces on the screens aren't the same. The buttons aren't in the same place depending upon what you're moving through.
Talking about Microsoft, I know we're nowhere anywhere near ham radio anymore, but can I show you something weird and cool Microsoft related?
Yeah, sure.
All right, hold on a second. Right back.
For the listeners, Kay has gotten up. He does have a handy talkie in the background.
Yeah, it's a woke song. It's my only radio, and it's a little embarrassing.
I have a few of them. I actually used to have the nice radios, and then when you walk with a dog and you drop a $300 radio, then you think, these Baofangs are really nice because you can walk the dog, and if you drop it, you can reach into the drawer and pull another one out.
Right. So my buddy Leo was an early Microsoft employee, and he recently went through a closet or something, and he sent me a bunch of Microsoft stuff from the early years to scan, to put up on Internet Archive. It was like literally the Microsoft COBOL programming guide, and weird older-ish stuff. And so I have this book here. It looks like it was like bound at Kinko's. It's not like a professional book, and it's called "That Was Then: Celebrating a Decade at Least at Microsoft," and this was produced sometime after the 10th anniversary of Microsoft, and it is the resumes, the unredacted resumes of all of the original first Microsoft employees. So I've got this book that's, I don't know, 200 pages, unredacted resumes of all these early Microsoft employees who are probably all like super rich because they got, stock options and stuff. And so anyway, I have this book, and it's really fascinating because there's people in here, and it's just like, I'm an expert in CPM, or I am looking for position designing real-time control systems for microprocessors, and I used a Burroughs B8000 computer, and anyway, so it's funny in that these resumes are just like super out of date. Some of these people, I sat down with my wife the other day, and we're just like randomly looking up people. Some of them still work at Microsoft. Some of them, are dead, and some of them have moved on to other things.
Will that go onto the Internet Archive?
I'm going to. I've been thinking about what to do with it. Me being me, yes, it will go onto Internet Archive. I think I'm going to scan it, and I'm probably going to redact the addresses and phone numbers in case someone has managed to not move in the 30 years since this was published.
And now this mid-show break. The future of podcasting and the QSO Today podcast is listener sponsorship. It keeps us lean and focused on providing you the best ham radio interviews since 2014. You can keep the QSO Today podcast commercial and sponsor-free by becoming a listener sponsor yourself. For $10 a month, or save 20% at $100 per year, you can become a listener sponsor. I am now recording the QSO Today podcast as video interviews that are available only as a benefit to listener sponsors through our QSO Today community website. As I develop the sponsorship tier, I will add bonus content for listener sponsors. Listener sponsors, not donors, are automatically members of the new QSO Today Academy. I am building the Academy website to include access to our SQL.io networking lounges all of the time, and Academy resources including over 400 previous Expo presentations with Q&A, and additional helpful ham radio educational resources. The benefit of listener sponsorship as an alternative to commercial sponsorship is that commercial sponsors influence the content and comments in the podcast. Listener sponsorship allows a greater degree of freedom to discuss any ham radio subject without commercial consequence. I have eliminated all commercials in the QSO Today podcast from episode 445, with the exception of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, as I think that this is a serious asset to a well-rounded ham radio education. I am not using Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon, but my own system for managing the community that could form out of the podcast. I direct you to the sponsorship section of the show notes pages beginning with the episode 444, where I list all of the contributors to the podcast since 2014, including sponsors, donors, and hams who have paid for transcriptions. If sponsorship is not your interest, then you can make any size donation to the podcast by clicking on the donation button on the QSO Today podcast website at qsotoday.com. There is a slider that you can use to adjust the amount of your donation. If you want to make your donation monthly, click on the recurring donation box. It is the recurring donations and the listener sponsorships that keep the lights burning here. Finally, you don't have to contribute anything to listen to the QSO Today podcast. You can use my Amazon affiliate link before shopping at Amazon by clicking on it on the right side of the show notes page. This will signal Amazon to send us a small percentage of what you purchase. This is the most painless way to ensure that the QSO Today project will be here next week. I want to thank everyone who has contributed and will contribute to my effort to create this oral history of amateur radio since 2014. It will eventually all be in the public domain for hams in the future to enjoy. Be sure to become a listener sponsor or make a donation today. And now we return to our QSO Today. That leads to a question. You're holding up a big Kinko's book that's about 2 inches thick, perhaps. How do you scan that? You're going to pull that thing apart and run it through like a sheet feeder? Or I know that people are sending you books and magazines and all kinds of stuff.
So this is different from my. This is a hobby, personal project, and so this is different from the official Internet Archive work that I do. Internet Archive has high-speed scanners that do not destroy the material that they scan. Yeah, in fact, I have a video of it. I don't know if I can share video or if that makes sense to do here.
What you can do is if you send me a link or send me the video, I'll put it up on the show notes page.
Great. Basically, imagine a V-shaped platen, and you put the book down on the platen, and a piece of glass comes down, holds the pages in place. 2 digital cameras across from each page take pictures of the pages. Then the glass lifts up. Someone manually turns the page. It repeats again. They can get through a book, a thick book, in the matter of minutes. The Internet Archive can scan 4,000 books a day at its various scanning centers, and without destroying any of them. And they go into storage, and the Internet Archive retains what it scans. So when someone sends me a rare ham radio document, book, magazine, or something, and then it goes to our scanning center, the one that we're using for the ham radio stuff is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Nothing gets destroyed. Nothing gets debound. It's just preserved and then preserved. As for this Microsoft book, I'm probably just going to scan it or have somebody scan it, because I don't want to debind this, but I can't really justify sending this to Internet Archive either, because it's not ham radio related.
Do you have a counterpart in the computer history side of Internet Archive?
I do. Yeah, Jason Scott.
I think that would be fascinating reading for anybody that's a historian who likes original source material.
Absolutely. So anyway, it'll get scanned. It'll get online.
It doesn't lead us yet to the Internet Archive, because I think I like the conversation about where you went with Atari. Are any of the people in Atari still there, the originals, that are kind of guiding the acquisitions or the interest or even the nostalgia part of Atari?
No, there's not. I used to joke, and I think this joke is now obsolete, but a year ago I was joking that Atari is 2 lawyers and a filing cabinet. They have their patent their trademark assets, and they'll slap their logo on a hat or a T-shirt, and they'll license that for, you want an Atari logo on a mug? Sure, you can license that. And it seems that they've changed directions from that. They have hired on, when I said earlier that they bought the Atari Age forums, the guy who has run that for the past 25 years, his name is Albert Yarusso. Albert, I just know him as Albert. And Al he is now the Atari historian. He's as part of his job. And so he hasn't been at Atari the whole time, but he's been a fan and a historian of Atari the whole time. And I have some faith that he will keep the ship going in the right direction. So the fact that they hired him gives me some hope that, no, he hasn't been there for the whole time, but I trust him.
You have a podcast microphone and a boom, headphones. Are you a podcaster as well?
Yes, I have 2 podcasts.
What podcasts do you have?
One with the Atari thing is called Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. And in that, me and a couple of buddies talk about what's new in the Atari 8-bit world. We talk about what our personal projects, and then just like what interesting news is out there. That's kind of one aspect of it. The other one is interviews. I don't have quite as many interviews as you do, Eric, but I've interviewed more than 400 people who did interesting things with Atari computers. Either they were programmers, or they were management, or they were founded the company or whatever. So I interview people who worked at Atari back in the day.
Given the number of people that you've interviewed regarding interesting things that people could do with Atari computers, do you have one that stands out as the most interesting thing that somebody did with an Atari computer? Like, did they run a roller coaster with it or something?
Well, not a roller coaster, but fireworks. There was a guy who had the first, or one of the first, computer-controlled fireworks companies. So when you want to set up what your July 4th fireworks display, you hired his company. It was all ran off an Atari computer, and he built like a custom like hardened case for it, so he could take it from place to place. It was battery powered. It had a little 5-inch black and white screen, so we could and then the entire fireworks show in 1982 or whatever was run off a Atari computer. I've talked to people who, let's see, there was this kid who built a robot arm, like a kind of arm that could like pick up blocks and move them from place to place. And this kid was like hired by, he was kind of a nerdy, a sciencey kid, and he was hired by a museum to create this thing. And then this thing was in a museum, and people could use this robot arm, which was controlled by an Atari. We have video of him. He was on some morning show, some TV show demonstrating. They brought in the entire museum arm display, and it didn't work because of the studio lights. It worked in the museum because it was dim, and the whatever optical sensors could see where the blocks were. And under the studio lights, it didn't work. They knew it wasn't going to work because it didn't work in testing, the warm up before the show started airing. And the man who was the host of the show had just learned that the show had been canceled, and he was really salty. He was just okay. So we have this video of this poor kid, this high school kid, trying to show off this thing he built for the local museum where you can use robots and computers, and then the host of the show is just being a complete jerk to him. It's beautiful.
So it didn't work out.
Didn't work out.
But you find with your podcast, you obviously find enough opportunities to have discussions about Atari that keeps the whole Atari thing alive.
Absolutely. Everyone has, who did something with those machines has a story. I talked to programmers who Atari had a thing called Atari Program Exchange, and basically it was the App Store, where it was a catalog, but anybody could create a program, submit it to be in this Atari Program Exchange catalog, and it was really niche software. There was like a program to learn how to finger spell, doing sign language. There was a program for doing hydraulic calculations if you were a person who did hydraulic systems. I mean, really, really niche stuff. So, this catalog would come a couple times a year, and you could order these things. And these people got a generous 10% cut from Atari. So if someone bought your finger spelling program or something, you might get a couple bucks. So some of the people actually made quite a lot of money with popular games and things like that. Anyway, so for a while I was going out and I was trying to find the programmers, the authors of every one of the APX programs. And there was like 300 published. I found like 78% of them or something. And all of those people had stories about how they got the computers, why they made their little niche application, how much money they made, with Atari Program Exchange. Some of them, paid off their house with it, and some of them One guy literally sold one copy of his one program. So
That's really interesting. Before we leave Atari, how large do you think the Atari community is now?
I don't know. I know it's a worldwide community, and I know there's many aspects of it, like ham radio. A thousand hobbies in one, right? Atari has a lot of little niches. I'm into the Atari 8-bit computer. That's my thing. There are many people who are into the Atari VCS or 2600, the game system that I think more people are probably familiar with. That it came with combat. You play Breakout on it. It was just kind of the home game system. So there's people who are into that. And then there was the later series, the Atari ST computers, which was a 16-bit computer system with a Macintosh-like GUI. And some people are programming them, some people are playing games, some people are making new versions using FPGAs. So I don't know how to even begin to assess how big that community of all these various people interested in Ataris are.
How did ham radio coincide with this? You got your license while you were in college. Were you involved in amateur radio, and have you been kind of along the way up to this point?
I'm not going to answer your question yet. One other last Atari thing. The ham radio community, as I understand it, loved the Atari computers because they didn't emit RFI. There was so much shielding in these things because of FCC regulation. So the Apple II, Apple didn't follow. They didn't need to follow FCC regulations for various reasons, and you could put different cards in them and stuff. And it was just like a noise generating machine, right? There's so much RFI. But the Atari computers, they had to follow different rules, and there was all the shielding, and they did not do RFI. So the ham radio community, if you wanted to get on RTTY or whatever you were doing, back in the 80s, the Atari computer was the one they had.
But the Atari that you have there, that has kind of the same form factor as the Apple II, the keyboard above the motherboard.
They modeled the Atari 800 after the IBM Selectric typewriter, because this thing came out in 1979. People were still scared of computers. They didn't understand them. And Atari wanted it to look like something familiar and safe. So they did their best to make it look like a typewriter, like a IBM Selectric. The best, the most reliable, the best.
If I could get one, I would have one now.
So yeah, I mean, vaguely it looks like an Apple II, but...
Vaguely, but it looks more like a Selectric.
Yeah.
A Selectric 3, actually.
Yes, I think so.
More modern look. So let's talk a little bit about ham radio. You've been involved in ham radio, obviously, for this opportunity for you to be the ham radio archivist for the Internet Archive. How did that all play together? I mean, you've got a nice Morse code album cover on the wall behind you.
Isn't that great? Learn code the easy way, complete on 133 1/3 RPM record.
I actually had that one when I was a novice to get up to general. I also had the Amico Morse code course.
Mm-hmm. So in my doing my Atari podcast and doing the interviews, when I was talking to people about what I interview somebody and was like, hey, do you have anything from back in the day? And people would send me stuff, source code or catalogs or old books or whatever, and I would digitize them and whatever needed to be done and get them onto Internet Archive. And that's how I learned to do the ham radio job. That's how I learned to use the Internet Archive tools, the command line interfaces, and the various scripts and doing metadata, and I kind of just self-taught on the Atari stuff. So when I saw that the opportunity was available, they were looking for someone to do the ham radio archiving. I already knew how to use the tools and realized it was the exact same thing I had been doing for Atari, the exact same work for ham radio. Find the interesting material, get it up onto Internet Archive, and talk to interesting people along the way.
I'm assuming you work for the Internet Archive, or do you work for the funding source?
I work for the Internet Archive.
So essentially, the ARDC funds the position at the Internet Archive, right, for the creation of this vast library of amateur radio stuff.
Right. Yeah, the Internet Archive got a grant from the ARDC to do this project, which includes my time, includes the scanning of material, digitization of other material, shipping, just a lot of just everything. It just covers the whole kit and caboodle.
One of the things I've noticed, and perhaps people haven't thought about this, but I'm sure that you've probably mentioned it in many of the interviews you've done, is that every amateur radio club in the world has had newsletters from the very beginning of time. And it's my understanding that you're actually going out to clubs and seeing what you can get as far back as you can go. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I basically started, I'm still working through it. It's a huge list, but I went to the ARRL website. Give me a list of all the clubs, got the spreadsheet, searched for the word newsletter, and there's like 1,500 or 2,000 clubs just in the United States on that list. So I'm going down and just working through this list and emailing all of them and saying, hey, can we archive your newsletter? Some of the clubs have done a great job of preserving their own history already. All their their newsletters are already on their website. They're in PDF format. They say, sure, go for it. I download all the PDFs. I tweak the metadata a little. I put them up into the Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications, and it's done. Some of the clubs have not done as good a job. They're busy having fun with their radios, and that's fine too. And in which case, if I tell them if their club has newsletters on paper that they haven't digitized yet, they can ship them to us. We digitize them and then get them online. And then not only are they digitized and available for the world to read, but they're full text searchable. You can sort them by date. You can, search for your call sign or your grandma's call sign and easily search through, find all the information in these newsletters.
There's a fantastic amount of information. Some of these clubs are 100 years old. Let's say the average one is 50 years old. 50 times 12 is 600. Each club, 2,000 clubs times 600 newsletters times 10 pages each, or whatever it is. It's a fantastic amount of material.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And it's a lot of material and a lot of clubs.
Did you think there'd be so much?
Yes.
Because I hadn't even thought about the club part of it. I was thinking about, all of us who are making content like QSO Today, or there's so much content being made now. I guess we forget that people were mimeographing content for years and years.
Yeah.
Is this a one-man job, Kay, or do you think you're going to need a helper?
For now, it's a one-man job. I have been considering the fact that I can hire on a part-time helper, and I might need to do that soon. I've just gotten the okay to expand the scope of this to include more early digital communications that's not necessarily ham radio. So, for instance, early internet, ARPANET stuff, and very early internet. And so I might bring someone else to help me with that, because my hands are laden with the ham radio material right now.
Now, the ham radio material that you're archiving, is it North America, United States, or are you looking at clubs all over the world?
All over the world. Absolutely. I've done reached out to a bunch of Canadian clubs as well. We're well represented in Canada. But as for the rest of the world, absolutely. We have clubs from, I'm trying to find my list here. We have clubs from all over the world and in different languages. And sometimes there's a bit of a barrier in getting their okay to do that. It's just a language barrier, but people are interested, and the answer is yes.
If we're thinking about the future, I've spoken to you about my stuff as well. My will right now says it's all going to go to the ARRL on the one hand. On the other hand, the Internet Archive is a nonprofit organization, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that means that because it's a nonprofit organization, it has a board of directors that's elected every whatever the term of election is, and that it should be an ongoing concern forever.
Yes.
Is that how the Internet Archive looks at itself? If you're assimilating all of the information just in the area of ham radio, that all this is going to pour into the Internet Archive to be available, does the Internet Archive see itself as being an organization that will continue as long as humankind is around?
That is the goal. That is absolutely the goal. Realistically, is that possible? I don't know. There could be an earthquake could swallow up San Francisco and the Internet Archive, and then it's gone. What are the odds of that, right?
But that is a question. If we're talking about the Internet Archive, is the Internet Archive only sitting in San Francisco, and does it have servers all over the world?
There's actually backups. They have servers in several locations. All over the world is an overstatement, but there are duplicates of the material in multiple locations outside of California. The goal is for this material at Internet Archive and in DLARC to be available permanently to help people today and help people in 100 years. And the material that goes in there, the goal is to have it be there for the very long term.
There's a CTO of the Internet Archive, I would think, and there's probably a team around him that are thinking about new technologies for mass storage. What's the best way to access those mass storage technologies? I mean, obviously, there's a whole industry, Google and Microsoft and everybody else is involved in as well, for being on the cutting edge of storage so that that data is not lost. Does the Internet Archive, are they thinking the same way, even though they're a nonprofit?
You're not wrong, but I think that the Internet Archive is a little bit more of a scrappier organization than you're envisioning. It's not Google.
It doesn't have $1 trillion of revenue every year.
No, it doesn't. The Internet Archive works hard to be there and to have the material be available and to be stable. They're not investing in the latest crazy holographic storage future. It's a lot of hard drives. They have 99 petabytes of information. That's a lot of storage. It takes a lot of servers, and it's a lot of hard drives.
Well, it's also a lot of front-end processing to be able to serve up that content on demand. Like Google, I think we expect, on a Google search to be satisfied, we have to have it almost instantly by the time we take our fingers off the button. Does the Internet Archive have similar kind of metrics in terms of wanting to make sure that the performance is more than adequate?
It does. I say we, like I'm doing that. I'm not. There's a whole team that does that. They do their best.
We can't blame you.
Yeah, right. They do. Don't blame me. They do their best to keep it fast, and they know when it's not, and then they go to fix it. And some things work faster than others. I mean, Internet Archive is probably best known for the Wayback Machine. Some people don't even know what the Internet Archive is, but they know the Wayback Machine, which is this thing where you can see websites that don't exist anymore, or how websites used to be, before they were changed or redacted or whatever. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but the Wayback Machine is not the fastest thing. But I mean, it's pulling. It's got so much data to pull from, and sometimes it has 500 versions of a website. Then you can scroll back in time.
Right. Every time it was incremented.
Right. I would like to see that faster myself. So it's not all microsecond instant Google search speeds. But it's great. It's that it's there at all, and it's pretty fast.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and Company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. My first website is on the Wayback Machine, which I from like 1991, I think.
Wow.
It is pretty cool. What is the most unusual amateur radio document or video or audio? What is the most interesting amateur radio specimen have you received?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Maybe it's not interesting to anybody else but you.
Oh, okay.
But as a historian of technology, what is the most interesting amateur radio specimen that you've received?
A couple of things that pop to mind is we have a collection of aviation wireless news issues. This was a magazine published starting in 1918, Aviation and Wireless News. And it's this magazine that they were talking about the two hot new technologies that existed, airplanes and radio. And sure, why not combine them and put them into a single publication? So that makes me happy that we have that. We have, oh my goodness, there's so many things. It's hard to have a favorite. We have sometimes it's the stories behind the things that make me happy. Somebody donated a few issues of Florida Skip, which was a magazine, or probably more of a newspaper that was published covering ham radio in the state of Florida. And it started being published in the 1960s, and it went through the 80s or early 90s. It found a few issues of that and sent them in. And then I was interested in this. So it was published by a person named Andy Clark, W4IYT. And I tried to reach out and find him. But he had passed away, silent key. But I found his son, also named Andy Clark, also call sign W4IYT. And he had a complete collection of this Florida Skip newspaper in the attic. So he donated them to Internet Archive. We scanned them all, and now we have a complete collection of this publication, this regional ham radio newspaper. It's full text searchable and all that. At the end, it was called something like Skip Cyber Ham or something, because it was the 90s and everything had to be cyber. So it was more about the intersection of ham radio and the early internet.
Does the Internet Archive have like a salt mine in Utah that it keeps all of the physical specimens?
Yeah.
Or is it a file cabinet in your garage?
No, it's more like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, it was the GSA warehouse.
Yeah, I've been to one of them, and it's just massively overwhelming, the amount of stuff in storage. What are those things called? Those modular shipping containers that they rows of them, like an insane, and just like going infinite into the distant of those, stacked 4 high.
And they've got like cranes that kind of move on the ceiling to kind of move those around. So if you're looking for something specific, then you know which container it's in.
Yeah, forklifts and pallet jacks and things. Just an amazing amount of material. And this, I've just seen one of the storage locations. There's another one that I have not been to. So
the Internet Archive then relies on member funding. It relies on ARDC, at least for this specific thing. Now, DLARC, which is the acronym, stands for
Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications.
And what's the and communications?
That's the squishy part that No one has told me what it's not, and they let me just do. They haven't reined me in on it. So to me, it includes shortwave radio. It includes pirate radio. It includes citizens band. It include anything radio related. Amateur television.
Anything that wasn't like police radio, or it could include that too.
Sure, scanner listening. Sure, local police radio. Why not? To me, it excludes commercial radio. You're listening to 98.4. That kind of we're kind of staying away from that.
Do you have like any old time radio?
Actually, Internet Archive has a lot of old time radio. Before I got here, they have an amazing old time radio collection, which is not part of DLARC. But yeah, if you want to hear old time radio and that sort of thing, you could spend the rest of your days listening to old serials and things.
How about telephony magazines? I love things like Stroger switches and crossbars and old telephone switch rooms and things like that. Do you have any magazines from those?
There's some telephony stuff. Absolutely. I should just try to send you a list of all the publications. But they've given me very little. They give me a lot of. I can do what I find interesting and think it's related. If it's vaguely related to radio, if it's related to communications, it can go in. Someone recently asked me at a college radio station, asked me to help preserve their archive. They have a website, they have preserved some stuff, but it's like it's falling apart. And they were just like, will you please just archive this stuff before the server crashes? I'm just like, well, college radio wasn't exactly what they asked me to do, but sure, here it is, and it's radio and it's non-commercial and it's not a far. I mean, I worked at my college radio station when I was getting my ham license, and it's all there. It's all radio. It's related. We're all family.
What's the interface, Kay, to the Internet Archive for ham radio? Do you have your own unique web page interface that makes it easy to find stuff, or are you using like Google search as the front end of the Internet Archive so that hopefully a Google search or a Bing search engine will get you into the archive?
Internet Archive has its own interface and its own search engine, which is very good and fast. But yeah, if you just go to Google and you search for something in the Internet Archive, ICOM manual or the Rain Radio Report or whatever, I mean, Google should find it and direct you right into where you want to go. But if you go to archive.org/details/DLARC, all lowercase, then you can find it's kind of the homepage of where you can see everything. There's closing in on 100,000 items right now, including newsletters, magazines, books, podcasts, videos, presentations from ham radio conferences, much more. Anyway, so you want to search there. I think that's the preferred way to do it. If you click the search metadata function, that's kind of like the widest search. If you search for something vague, like I don't know, if you're searching for EME or something, search for moon bounce or something, you can find it there. And if you do search text contents, then that's what it sounds like. You're searching the full text of everything, the full transcriptions of audio that we've transcribed, and you can get a lot more. We can find a lot more that way. So I think that's the best way to look around. Or you just browse. You just start poking around, and you're going to find hundreds of things to take up your weekend as you find some of the amazing materials that we found.
But if you're looking for all the articles that one of the QST authors wrote, for example, now obviously QST Magazine has their own searchable index, but you also have the ability to find those articles as well. By the way, do you have QST from edition 1 all the way back, or is that being held by the ARRL?
I will say that the ARRL has made clear they don't want to participate. They want to make their stuff available at their own website. They want to sell the material that they sell, and I get it. That's their right. We don't have all the QSTs. Some of the earliest stuff, the magazine's been around for a long time. Some of that earliest stuff is in the public domain. So we have that.
So if it's in the public domain, then you have it. And if it isn't, then they have it, at least as far as QST is concerned. But a 73 magazine doesn't exist anymore. Do you have all the 73s?
So before he died, Wayne Green explicitly wanted 73 magazine at Internet Archive. He donated a complete collection of the magazines, and they are scanned. So we have every issue of 73. It is there because he gave the okay.
Is there something that we haven't touched on, Kay, right now with the Internet Archive or with K. Savetz K6KJN?
I could talk about this stuff all day. But let's see. I guess the thing that I would ask of your listeners is, please, just number one, just check out Digital Library of Amateur Radio Communications. Browse around. There's so much material there, so many little niches and so many interesting things. We didn't even talk about the archives of the early amateur radio discussion lists, Usenet lists, and mailing lists. That you want to see old arguments about whether the FCC dropping the Morse code requirement was going to ruin ham radio or not. I mean, we have fresh, hot discussions about that.
The Internet Archive then would be an ideal primary source for people that are working on their masters or doctorates. Is there a way to actually reference in your bibliography the Internet Archive?
I am thankfully not in the academic sphere too much, but I am sure that there must be a known way to cite things that are on URLs, and I've seen Internet Archive is and the Wayback Machine are referenced so much in books that I read, so I don't know how to do it, but they do it.
If you're a builder, you're a creator, you're a modifier, you're a designer, if you have a very interesting ham radio project that you've documented well, you've got schematics, you've got theory of operation, you have pictures that didn't get published in QST or didn't get published in one of the magazines or didn't get published in the Ham Radio Club newsletter, but you actually have the documentation. Are you interested in that kind of stuff too?
Absolutely. I'm interested in personal stories and personal projects. If anyone has created anything ham radio related, like you said, it's a project schematics or their club newsletter or their YouTube videos or their podcast or whatever it is.
Or it's a theme and variation on a repeater controller or something like that.
You seem like you're talking about a very specific person and idea.
Well, it's not me, but I'm thinking that ham radio operators are prolific.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, by the way, they're not very good about getting their stuff out there once they've made it. But if you're the daughter, son, widow of a ham who all of a sudden you open up his file cabinet and you realize that he's been working on projects for years and he's done amazing documentation, and there are these guys, but they've never published anything. That's stuff that you're interested in as well.
Absolutely. And you can either upload it to Internet Archive yourself, and anyone can upload anything to Internet Archive. And if it's tagged ham radio, I will find it, and then I will add it to DLARC. Or you can just email me and send it, at KAY@archive.org, and send me the digital files, or send us the paper documents, and we'll get it scanned. We'll take it and put it online. And ham radio, as you know, is all about learning and sharing and people being generous with their knowledge, and absolutely we want to be part of that. The other thing you mentioned, Grandpa died and left behind this stuff. We've had several people now contact us and say that my family member was a ham, he died, he left behind all this material, not stuff that they created, but filing cabinets worth of manuals or catalogs, ham radio catalogs, or reference material going back to the 60s, or there's these bookshelves that are literally falling down with the weight of the books. We don't know what to do with them, and we take it all and we scan it, we put it online. This one man contacted me. He's like, I don't know, it's a lot of material. It's 5 filing cabinets. I'm just like, great, that's nothing. I mean, for the scanning center, it's an afternoon's worth of work.
What a gift, though. When you're thinking about it, obviously the children or the widow or the widower of the ham who had amassed all of this information. On the one hand, it's very easy to hire a bin, because I see that in my dad's neighborhood. Someone dies and all of a sudden there's these giant bins out in front and people are they're just chucking everything into the bin. It's all going to the trash.
Yeah.
On the one hand. On the other hand, but if you actually, my father spent a lot of time down here, his entire life down here.
This was important to Dad. Maybe it's important to somebody else too. And it feels wrong to just throw it in the bin.
You know what? You make me feel so good, Kay. I'm sitting here thinking that anything that I produced, but all of the people that I know who've produced amazing things, maybe it doesn't get published, but it's still amazing. I'm so glad to know that you're there and that the Internet Archive is there and that the ARDC is funding it and will continue to do that, hopefully, God willing, forever. I guess with that, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
I know you thought we didn't have anything to talk about, but I had so much fun.
I didn't know we were going to talk about Atari for 45 minutes. So
I don't know anything about Atari. I was never a game player, but I remember the time. I remember that whole era of this computer evolution, and now it all seems the same. Whether it's Dell or Asus or whatever, they're all the same. It's like ham radio. It was like everybody's imaginations went crazy. They all had this idea of what that should look like. It's kind of like in the 50s movies, if you remember, like Forbidden Planet, when they first introduced Robbie the robot. There was this idea of what should a robot look like, whether it was a humanoid thing or whether it was something that you saw in Star Wars, for example. The whole computer evolution had the same kind of quality to it. It was a great time to be very imaginative. And I think we go through those technology phases, and I think those are so interesting.
Absolutely. I think for young people, it's another one now. I mean, with Raspberry Pis and just the maker community, and I don't think it's gone forever. It's changed. It's different.
It's morphing again.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would think in the Atari community that there may be even a Raspberry Pi element. People that are trying to use a Raspberry Pi perhaps adapt it to Atari games.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think of 10 ways right now that people are using those little computers to do things. Yeah. You can use them as a sub-processor or as a cartridge that holds every game ever made,
Right, exactly. To give that old, warm, nostalgic feeling. Kate, thank you so much. 73, I appreciate it more than you can imagine that you stepped up and agreed to let me interview you.
73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Kay. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in K6KJN in the search box at the top of the page. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing on the subscribe buttons on the show notes page. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages. Your value for value support is recognized on the QSO Today podcast and in the weekly show notes. Use our Amazon link when you shop on Amazon. Clicking on this link before you enter Amazon will allow Amazon to pay us a small commission on what you purchase. This is a very painless way to support the QSO Today podcast. QSO Today is syndicated on every podcast platform, including Spotify and the iTunes Store. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.